Don't take it off, just do it. The rancher still undid it and acted Wild West stories. In the middle of this vast, open land, Samuel Hayes, a seasoned rancher, rode his horse along the familiar paths of his property. The ranch had been in his family for generations, and every fence, every barn, every field of grazing cattle carried memories of long, hard years of work. Samuel had grown up learning the ways of the land. From the moment he could walk, he had been riding horses, herding cattle, and mending fences. The life was not easy, but it was honest, and it was his. Samuel was a tall man, with sun-weathered skin and hands that bore the marks of years of labor. Every line on his face seemed to tell a story, and his eyes, sharp and watchful, had seen much in their time. He had survived winters that froze the rivers solid, storms that flattened pastures, and encounters with men who had no respect for the law. The townspeople admired him for his skill, his courage, and his patience. Samuel was not a man to rush into danger, but he never hesitated when he knew action was needed. On that late afternoon, the ranch seemed calm. The cattle grazed quietly, the wind whispered through the tall grass, and the horses in the corral flicked their tails lazily. Samuel had spent the day inspecting fences and checking on the herds. Everything seemed as it always had, orderly and predictable. Yet in the quiet of the evening, he felt a small unease creeping into his thoughts. Something about the air felt different. Perhaps it was the way the wind shifted, or the unusual silence across the plains. Samuel could not explain it, but his instincts told him to be watchful. As he adjusted the reins and began guiding his horse back to the barn, a figure appeared in the distance. At first, it was nothing more than a shadow against the glowing horizon. But as Samuel drew closer, he saw it was a man, walking fast, his hat tilted down, carrying a small bundle in his hands. The man's clothes were worn, dusty from travel, and his boots were caked with mud. Samuel slowed his horse, studying the stranger carefully. Out here, visitors were rare, and one never knew what kind of trouble might arrive with them. The stranger reached the ranch gates and stopped, raising his head to look at Samuel. There was urgency in his eyes, a mixture of fear and desperation. "Please," the man called, his voice trembling slightly. "I need your help. My herd, my cattle, they're in danger. A gang of rustlers is heading this way. I don't know where else to turn." Samuel studied the man silently for a long moment. He had faced rustlers before and knew the danger they brought. His heart remained steady, but a flicker of concern passed through him. He had rules, principles he had lived by for years. He never acted without thinking, never put himself at unnecessary risk. But something about this man, the way he pleaded, the way he carried himself despite exhaustion, touched a part of Samuel that rarely surfaced. The frontier demanded tough choices, and Samuel knew he might be called to make one. "Calm down," Samuel said finally, his voice low and steady. "Tell me exactly what happened." The man's words tumbled out in a rush. He explained that a gang had been moving through the area, rounding up cattle from unsuspecting ranchers. His own herd was valuable, and without help, they would lose everything. Samuel listened carefully, his mind working quickly. He weighed the risks, thinking about the men, the land, and the cattle. Then he glanced back at his own property. His family's ranch had stood for generations because of careful decisions, hard work, and courage when needed. This situation, he realized, was no different. The stranger leaned on the fence, exhausted. "Please," he said again, "I don't have anyone else to turn to." "You're the only one who can help." Samuel's eyes softened. He could see fear but also trust in the man's expression. Out here, trust was rare, and it had to be earned. The stranger was placing his life and livelihood in Samuel's hands. It was a heavy responsibility, but Samuel had never shied away from responsibility. He dismounted slowly, tying his horse to a post. The man watched him nervously, unsure what the rancher would do. Samuel walked over, inspected the stranger's bundle, and then nodded to himself. "All right," he said. "We'll go, but we have to act carefully. There's no room for mistakes." As Samuel prepared his horse and gathered the few tools he might need, the stranger's eyes widened. "You're not going to hesitate?" he asked. Samuel shook his head. Hesitation could be dangerous. On the frontier, delays could cost lives, cattle, or land. Samuel knew the risk, but he also knew the reward of doing the right thing at the right time. Before they set off, the stranger leaned closer and said quietly, almost as if afraid someone might overhear, "Don't take it off, just do it." Samuel frowned, unsure what the man meant. He glanced at the leather gloves he wore, gloves he had used for years to protect his hands from rope burns, thorns, and the harsh sun. They were worn and slightly cracked, but they had served him well. "Don't take them off?" Samuel asked. The man nodded, though he didn't explain further. "Just trust me," he said. Samuel didn't fully understand the warning, but he trusted his instincts. The plains had taught him that sometimes advice came in mysterious ways, and sometimes one had to act without full understanding. With a final glance at his own land, he tightened the reins and led the stranger out across the rolling hills toward the herd. The wind blew across the prairie, carrying the faint smell of grass and dust, and the sound of distant hooves. It was a world of beauty and danger intertwined. As they rode, Samuel kept his eyes on the horizon, scanning for any signs of trouble. He noticed the cattle in the distance, some grazing calmly, others nervously shifting as if sensing the same unease he felt. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that stretched across the plains like fingers reaching out. Samuel's mind raced, not with fear, but with calculations and strategies. He thought about how he would approach the rustlers, how to protect the herd, and how to ensure both their safety and the safety of the cattle. The stranger rode silently, clearly exhausted but trusting Samuel's judgment. For a moment, there was a strange sense of calm between them, a mutual understanding that this was a dangerous world, but one in which courage and skill could make a difference. Samuel's experience gave him confidence, but he remained alert. The Wild West was not kind to those who underestimated it, and every decision mattered. As the first hints of evening shadows fell across the land, Samuel's instincts sharpened. He could hear the faint sound of hooves in the distance, growing louder with every moment. The rustlers were close. There was no turning back. Samuel knew that soon the calm of the afternoon would be replaced by action and courage. Yet even as tension built, there was a strange beauty in the moment. The sun setting over the plains, the wind whispering through the grass, and the feeling of being alive in a land that tested every person who called it home. Samuel's heart remained steady. He was ready. The stranger's warning about the gloves lingered in his mind, mysterious and unexplained. But one thing was certain. In this moment, hesitation could mean disaster. The rancher, seasoned by years of life on the frontier, knew that action, not doubt, would be the key. With a steady hand on the reins and a mind focused on the task ahead, Samuel Hayes rode into the fading light, ready to face whatever came next. Even in the quiet moments before the storm, the rancher felt the weight of responsibility, the pull of duty, and the strange thrill of adventure. The Wild West had always been a place where courage mattered more than comfort, and experience more than luck. Samuel was about to be tested once again, and he was determined to rise to the challenge. The plain stretched endlessly before him, golden and wide, and somewhere out there, trouble waited. But Samuel Hayes was not a man to back down. He was a rancher, a protector of the land and the cattle, and a man who knew that sometimes action mattered more than understanding. As Samuel Hayes rode alongside the stranger, the horizon grew darker with the approaching evening. The wind had picked up, carrying dust and the faint scent of wildflowers across the plains. Every so often, a bird would take flight, startled by the distant sound of hooves that were growing louder with every passing minute. Samuel kept his eyes sharp, scanning the vast expanse of land for any signs of danger. He had faced challenges before, but something about this situation felt different. The urgency in the stranger's voice lingered in his mind, and the cryptic words he had spoken, "Don't take it off, just do it," kept echoing like a riddle Samuel could not yet solve. The stranger rode quietly beside him, leaning heavily on his reins. He was exhausted, his clothes dusty from travel, but there was a determination in his posture that spoke of someone who had been through hardship and refused to give up. Samuel glanced at him briefly and noticed the worry etched on his face, the kind of worry that only comes when one's livelihood is on the line. He knew the man had trusted him completely, and that trust was not something to be taken lightly. "Tell me more about the rustlers," Samuel said finally, breaking the silence. "How many are there? Are they armed?" The stranger swallowed hard, his throat dry from the long ride. "There are at least 6 of them," he replied, his voice tense. "They're well armed and fast. They've been moving from ranch to ranch, taking cattle wherever they can. They won't stop until they get what they want." He paused, fear flickering in his eyes. "I tried to stop them before, but they're clever. They know the land and they move in ways most people can't predict." Samuel nodded slowly, processing the information. He had faced rustlers before, but every situation was unique. The key was preparation, observation, and timing. He had to assess the threat, understand the terrain, and plan carefully. The plains were vast, but Samuel knew them like the back of his hand. Every hill, every fence line, every patch of tall grass could be used to his advantage. He could see the potential routes the rustlers might take, the places where they might hide, and the paths that would allow him to reach the herd before it was too late. The stranger, sensing Samuel's focus, spoke again, this time with a hint of desperation. You really don't understand what I meant earlier," he said. "About the gloves, don't take them off. They're important. If you remove them, it might make things much harder or worse." Samuel frowned, turning his gaze to his own hands. His leather gloves were worn, cracked in places, but they had protected him through countless days of work. He had never thought much about them beyond their practicality, yet the stranger's words suggested something more. "What exactly do you mean?" Samuel asked, curiosity mixed with caution. The stranger shook his head, unable or unwilling to explain further. "Just trust me," he said. "There's a reason I said it. I've seen what happens when people ignore it." "You don't want to ignore it." Samuel studied him for a moment. The plains had taught him that sometimes warnings came in strange ways, and sometimes the meaning was revealed only when the moment was upon you. He decided to keep the gloves on, at least for now, and focus on the task ahead. As they continued their ride, Samuel began to spot signs that the rustlers were closer than the stranger had initially feared. A broken fence post here, hoofprints in the dirt there, and the occasional shadow moving against the hills. Every detail was important. He guided his horse with careful precision, pointing out areas where the stranger might take cover if needed and where the herd could be protected. His mind worked quickly, forming a plan that balanced safety with action. The sun was now nearly gone, casting long shadows that stretched across the prairie like dark fingers. Samuel's horse moved steadily, its hooves kicking up dust as they approached the area where the herd had been last seen. He slowed down, allowing his eyes to adjust to the dimming light. The rustlers could be anywhere, hidden in the folds of the land or behind tall grass, waiting for the right moment to strike. Samuel knew that one wrong move could put both him and the stranger at risk. "Keep your eyes open," he whispered to the stranger. "Watch for any movement, any signs that they're near. We have to act carefully but quickly. Hesitation could be costly." The stranger nodded, gripping his reins tightly. His hands were shaking slightly, but there was determination in his posture. Samuel could see that the man trusted him, and that trust gave him a sense of responsibility that weighed heavily on his shoulders. He had to succeed. There was no other option. Suddenly, a distant sound caught Samuel's attention. It was faint at first, barely audible over the wind, but it grew steadily, a clatter of hooves against dirt, the unmistakable sound of a group moving fast across the plains. Samuel's heart rate increased slightly, but his mind remained calm. He had anticipated this moment. He adjusted his position, guiding his horse closer to a natural ridge that would give him a vantage point over the herd. From there, he could observe without being easily seen. The stranger looked at him, eyes wide. "They're coming," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Samuel nodded. "Yes, but we're ready. Stay calm and follow my lead. We'll handle this." He dismounted carefully, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. The stranger did the same, though his hands trembled slightly as he held onto the reins. Samuel's leather gloves, worn but reliable, protected his hands as he prepared for whatever was about to happen. The warning from earlier lingered in his mind, but for now he focused on the practical steps: observation, strategy, and timing. From the ridge, Samuel could see the herd in the distance, grazing unaware of the danger approaching. He also saw the rustlers, 6 men moving with speed and confidence, their eyes scanning the horizon for opportunities. Samuel noted their positions, the way they spread out to cover more ground, and the paths they were likely to take to reach the herd. Every detail mattered. Every moment counted. He could not afford mistakes. Turning to the stranger, Samuel gave a brief nod. "We move in 3 steps. First, we position ourselves to protect the herd. Second, we distract the rustlers. Third, we drive them away or capture them if possible." "Understand?" The stranger nodded quickly, relief mixing with apprehension. "Yes, I understand. I'll do exactly as you say." Samuel felt a surge of confidence. The plan was simple but required precision and courage. He had faith that with careful action, they could protect the herd and teach the rustlers a lesson they would not forget. The sky darkened further, stars beginning to peek through the fading light. The rustlers were getting closer, their movements growing bolder as they neared the herd. Samuel adjusted his position, making sure he and the stranger were hidden behind natural cover while still keeping a clear view. He whispered instructions to the man, guiding him on where to stand and what to watch for. The stranger followed without hesitation, showing a willingness to trust Samuel's experience completely. As the rustlers approached, Samuel could feel the tension building. He remembered the stranger's warning about the gloves, and while he did not yet understand its full meaning, he felt a strange reassurance from wearing them. They were more than just protection for his hands. They symbolized preparedness, experience, and the readiness to act. Samuel took a deep breath, steadying his nerves. The moment of truth was nearly upon them, and he was ready to face it. In that quiet, tense moment, the rancher reflected on the lessons of the frontier, the importance of trust, the value of experience, and the courage to act when it mattered most. The plains were unforgiving, and danger could arrive without warning. But those who were prepared, those who observed and acted wisely, could overcome even the greatest challenges. Samuel knew that he and the stranger had a chance, not just to protect the herd, but to demonstrate the power of careful planning, courage, and quick action. The rustlers drew nearer, unaware that Samuel and the stranger were watching, waiting for the right moment. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that only comes before decisive action. Samuel's hands tightened on the reins, his eyes sharp and focused. He whispered one final instruction to the stranger: "Stay ready, stay calm, and do exactly as I say." Everything depends on timing now. With the wind rustling through the tall grass and the distant sounds of approaching danger, Samuel Hayes prepared to step into action. He could not yet see the full meaning of the stranger's warning, but he understood that hesitation would be costly. Out here on the Wild West plains, courage and decisiveness were everything. And Samuel was ready to show both. The rustlers were now within sight, moving with quiet confidence as they approached the herd. Their silhouettes were dark against the fading light of the evening sky. Samuel Hayes remained low behind the ridge, his eyes locked on every movement. His heart was steady, but his mind raced through possibilities. He had faced danger before, but this time the stakes felt higher. It wasn't just about protecting the cattle. It was about teaching a lesson, ensuring that those who thought they could take what wasn't theirs would be met with skill and courage. The stranger beside him shifted nervously, glancing at Samuel. "Are we going to fight them?" he asked quietly. Samuel shook his head, his voice calm. "Not yet. First, we need to position ourselves. We must make sure the herd is safe before we confront them. We act smart, not just fast." He adjusted his gloves, the leather worn and cracked but still providing protection and grip. The warning from earlier, "Don't take it off, just do it," still echoed in his mind. Samuel didn't fully understand it yet, but he sensed its meaning. Sometimes hesitation, sometimes overthinking, could be more dangerous than any physical threat. Slowly, Samuel led the stranger down the ridge, keeping low and using the natural dips and rises of the land as cover. Every step was calculated. He could see the rustlers spreading out, trying to surround the herd, unaware that someone was watching them. Samuel's experience told him exactly where to move, how to anticipate the rustlers' patterns, and how to keep the cattle safe. He pointed out a small cluster of rocks that would provide cover for the stranger, explaining exactly where to stand, when to duck, and how to act if the men noticed them. The stranger nodded, absorbing every detail, and Samuel felt a sense of reassurance. They were ready. As they approached the herd, Samuel noticed the cattle's nervous movements. Some had raised their heads, ears twitching, sensing the approaching danger. He moved closer but carefully, whispering to them in the soft, calm tone he always used with his animals. The cattle slowly settled, comforted by his presence, trusting the man who had tended them for years. Samuel knew that if the herd panicked, it would be chaos, and the rustlers could easily take advantage of that. Control over the situation meant control over the animals, and Samuel had both. From his vantage point, Samuel could see the rustlers preparing to move in. They were confident, laughing quietly to themselves, believing that they were about to succeed. Samuel gripped the reins tightly, his gloves protecting his hands as he adjusted his plan. He signaled to the stranger to stay put and wait for his instructions. The man crouched behind the rocks, tense but obedient. Samuel admired his courage. Trust in moments like these was rare, but the stranger had it completely. Then Samuel made a decision. He would confront the rustlers directly but carefully. Timing was everything. He guided his horse into a position where he could be seen just enough to distract them, drawing their attention while keeping the herd safe. The rustlers noticed him immediately, some raising their weapons, thinking they had the upper hand. Samuel held his ground, his gaze steady, exuding confidence. He didn't panic, didn't flinch, because panic was dangerous. Fear could be controlled, but hesitation could be fatal. The rustlers laughed, thinking him alone and inexperienced. "You're alone out here, old man," one of them sneered. "Step aside and we won't hurt you." Samuel didn't respond with words. Instead, he moved deliberately, positioning himself between the rustlers and the herd. His horse was calm beneath him, sensing his confidence, ready to follow every subtle command. Samuel's hands, gloved and steady, gripped the reins and the whip, tools he had mastered over years of ranch work. The rustlers underestimated him, as many did when they saw only a lone rancher. That was their mistake. With a swift motion, Samuel spurred his horse forward, moving in a way that forced the rustlers to react. He shouted loudly, not in fear but to assert control, and the herd, sensing his command, began to shift in the direction he wanted. The rustlers were momentarily startled. Their plan had been simple: scare the cattle and take them. But Samuel's unexpected action disrupted their calculations. He could see the surprise in their eyes, and he knew the moment to strike would be soon. The stranger watched, tense and anxious, but Samuel kept a careful eye on him. "Stay where you are," he whispered, though his voice was barely audible over the sound of hooves and rustling grass. "You will act only when I tell you. Do not move until I say so. Understand?" The man nodded, gripping his makeshift weapon tightly. Samuel's instructions were precise, because the slightest misstep could mean the difference between success and disaster. The rustlers regrouped, trying to encircle the herd from the other side. Samuel anticipated this move, turning his horse to block their path, forcing them to focus on him rather than the cattle. He moved with precision, every command to his horse deliberate, every action calculated. The rustlers began to realize that this was not a simple, weak rancher to intimidate. He was skilled, confident, and unafraid. Samuel could see their frustration growing, and he used it to his advantage. Then came the critical moment. Samuel spurred his horse forward, creating a loud clatter and scattering some of the cattle just enough to draw the rustlers closer. They raised their weapons, but Samuel was faster. He dodged, maneuvered, and directed the herd in a pattern that confused the men, making it harder for them to act. The stranger, watching closely, finally understood his role. Samuel gave a subtle nod, and the man moved quickly, driving part of the herd away from danger, guiding them to a safe area. Together, they worked as a team, moving with a coordination that seemed almost instinctive. The rustlers were becoming desperate, their confidence slipping. They hadn't expected the rancher to act with such skill, to control the herd, and to anticipate their every move. Samuel remained calm, his mind racing but focused. Every motion had a purpose, every decision was deliberate. The gloves on his hands, worn though they were, gave him the grip and protection he needed, and he realized the stranger's warning had been wise. Sometimes small details, like a simple piece of equipment, could make a big difference in critical moments. As the rustlers regrouped for a final attempt, Samuel took a deep breath, steadying himself. He could see the moment of opportunity, the exact point where he could act decisively. With a swift, practiced motion, he directed the herd in a controlled charge, forcing the rustlers back. Some fell, some stumbled, and others were forced to retreat as the cattle moved as one under Samuel's guidance. The herd, trusting the rancher, followed his lead perfectly. It was a display of skill, courage, and patience honed over years of life on the frontier. The rustlers, realizing they had underestimated Samuel Hayes, began to retreat, muttering threats and frustration. Samuel didn't pursue aggressively. He had ensured the safety of the cattle and the stranger, and that was his priority. He watched until they were gone, then guided the herd back to a secure area, making sure every animal was accounted for. The stranger, exhausted but relieved, let out a breath he hadn't realized he had been holding. Samuel dismounted, patting his horse and adjusting his gloves. His hands were raw from the maneuvers, but he felt a sense of satisfaction. The warning from earlier, the stranger's cryptic words, the tension and fear, they had all led to this moment of triumph. He looked at the stranger who was staring at him with awe and gratitude. I don't know what to say," the man stammered. Samuel smiled faintly. "You don't need to say anything. You did your part. The herd is safe, and that's what matters." In the quiet that followed, as the sun fully set and the stars began to appear, Samuel reflected on the events of the evening. The confrontation had been intense, but it had also been a reminder of everything he knew about the land, the animals, and the importance of decisive action. The stranger's warning about the gloves now made sense in a symbolic way. They were a reminder that preparation, care, and attention to detail mattered, especially when facing unexpected challenges. For a moment, the plain seemed calm again. The wind rustled through the grass, and the distant hills stood as silent witnesses to the events that had unfolded. Samuel Hayes, the rancher who had faced danger with patience, skill, and courage, felt a quiet satisfaction. He had acted when it mattered, protected those in need, and reinforced the lessons he had learned over a lifetime. The Wild West was a place of constant challenges, but those who acted wisely, trusted their instincts, and faced danger head-on could succeed, even against the odds. The last of the rustlers disappeared over the distant hills, their shouts fading into the wind. Samuel Hayes remained on the ridge for a few moments longer, ensuring that no other threats were lurking nearby. The herd had calmed down after the chaos, grazing quietly once again, sensing that the danger had passed. Samuel's heart was still steady, but a surge of adrenaline ran through him. He had faced the rustlers head-on, and now he had to ensure that everything was truly safe. The stranger, still catching his breath, approached Samuel cautiously. "I don't understand," he said, shaking his head. "They were strong, armed, and fast. How did you—" He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Samuel smiled faintly, patting the man's shoulder. "Experience," he said simply, "and paying attention, always paying attention. That's the difference between survival and failure out here. You never fight blindly. You fight with your mind, your instincts, and your patience." The stranger looked at Samuel with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "And the gloves?" he asked. "Were they really important?" Samuel glanced down at his worn leather gloves, now marked with dust and scratches. He flexed his hands, feeling the strength they had given him. "They weren't magic," he said slowly. "They were protection, yes, but also a reminder. Sometimes it's not about the tool itself, but what it represents: readiness, care, and the courage to act when the time comes." The warning wasn't just about the gloves. It was about not hesitating, about trusting yourself and taking action when it matters most. The stranger nodded, beginning to understand. The tension of the past hours seemed to settle in him, replaced by relief and newfound respect. Samuel turned his attention back to the herd. He walked among them, checking each animal carefully. There were no injuries, and no cattle had been taken. The rustlers' plans had been completely thwarted, and the rancher's calm leadership had made all the difference. As Samuel moved through the herd, he reflected on the events that had unfolded. The confrontation had been intense, but it was also a lesson. The Wild West was not a forgiving place. Those who underestimated danger or hesitated in critical moments often paid a high price. Samuel had learned long ago that courage was not reckless bravery. It was controlled, thoughtful action taken when the stakes were highest. The rustlers had made the mistake of underestimating him, and that had been their downfall. The stranger, now a little steadier, spoke again. "I've traveled a long way and faced many challenges, but I've never seen anything like that. You didn't panic, you controlled everything." Samuel nodded. "Panic solves nothing," he said. "Out here, fear is natural. It's the body's way of warning you, but you can't let it control you. You observe, you plan, and then you act decisively. That's the difference." The night was settling in fully now, stars beginning to twinkle in the dark sky. The wind had cooled, carrying a quiet stillness across the plains. Samuel took a deep breath, appreciating the moment of calm after the storm. The rancher had faced danger and prevailed, but he knew that the lesson extended beyond just this encounter. Life on the frontier demanded vigilance, courage, and the ability to make difficult decisions quickly. Every day was a test, and every decision mattered. Samuel guided the stranger to a safe area where the herd could be secured for the night. The man moved carefully, following Samuel's instructions without hesitation. Together, they ensured that the gates were closed, the cattle were calm, and everything was in order. Samuel's hands, still gloved, worked efficiently, tying gates and checking fences. Every movement was precise, every action deliberate. Even in moments of relief, a true rancher never let his guard down completely. Once the herd was safe, Samuel took a moment to sit on a nearby rock and observe the land around him. The plains stretched endlessly, quiet and beautiful under the night sky. He thought about the rustlers, about the stranger, and about the cryptic warning that had begun this chain of events. "Don't take it off, just do it." he repeated quietly to himself. He understood now. The warning had been less about the gloves themselves and more about the mindset required to face the unexpected. Preparation, awareness, and decisive action were what kept people safe and successful on the frontier. The stranger sat beside him, still catching his breath. "I've never met anyone like you," he said softly. "You didn't just fight. You led, you protected, and you kept calm the entire time. How do you do that?" Samuel looked at him, a faint smile on his lips. "Experience teaches you," he said. "But more than that, it's about trust. Trust in your skills, trust in your judgment, and trust in the instincts that life has taught you. You have to act when the moment comes, even if you don't fully understand everything at first." That's what the warning meant. The stranger nodded slowly, taking in the words. "I think I understand now. It's not just about avoiding danger. It's about facing it, controlling it, and making sure the right outcome happens." Samuel patted his shoulder again. "Exactly. And now you've seen it. You'll carry that lesson with you." They stayed there for a while, sitting quietly under the stars. The sounds of the prairie at night surrounded them, crickets chirping, a distant coyote howling, the soft rustle of grass in the wind. The events of the evening seemed almost surreal now, a test of skill, courage, and wisdom that had ended in success. Samuel allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction, knowing that he had done what needed to be done. Eventually, they prepared to return to the main ranch. Samuel led the herd back slowly, making sure every animal was accounted for and calm. The stranger followed, still awed by the day's events but learning quickly how to manage the herd under stress. Samuel offered advice along the way, showing him how to anticipate the movements of the cattle, how to use the terrain for safety, and how to remain calm under pressure. Each lesson was important, and the stranger absorbed them eagerly. By the time they reached the ranch, night had fully fallen. Samuel guided the herd into the pens, ensuring that all gates were secure and that the animals were comfortable. The stranger helped where he could, following Samuel's guidance, learning the skills that made the rancher so effective. When everything was in order, they finally paused to rest. Samuel leaned against the barn, removing some dust from his gloves and reflecting on the evening. The confrontation with the rustlers had been intense, but it had also been a reminder of why Samuel had survived on the frontier for so long. Awareness, preparation, courage, and decisive action were what kept people alive and their livelihood secure. And sometimes he realized the smallest details, a worn pair of gloves, a warning from a stranger, could make a difference in life-or-death situations. The stranger turned to him once more, admiration clear in his eyes. "I won't forget this day," he said. "You saved my herd and taught me more than I could have imagined. I hope one day I can repay you." Samuel shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. "No repayment necessary," he said. "Just remember what you've learned. Be ready, pay attention, and act when it matters." That's all anyone can ask for out here. For a while longer they sat in silence, watching the stars, listening to the quiet of the prairie. The events of the day had tested them, but they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. Samuel felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The land, the animals, the lessons of the frontier, they all reminded him why he had chosen this life. The Wild West was a place of danger and beauty, of challenge and reward, and those who faced it with courage and wisdom could succeed even against the odds. As the night grew colder, Samuel finally stood, stretching his stiff muscles and adjusting his gloves. "Rest now," he said to the stranger. "We'll have time to talk more tomorrow. For now, the herd is safe, and that's what matters." The stranger nodded, grateful and tired, and settled near the barn to rest, knowing he had survived a night that few could endure without fear. Samuel stayed a little longer, looking out across the plains, reflecting on the events of the evening and the lessons learned. The rustlers were gone, the herd was safe, and the cryptic warning had proven its value. He understood now that sometimes preparation alone wasn't enough. Sometimes courage and action had to accompany it. And that was the true lesson of the day, a lesson he would carry with him always, as would anyone who heard the story of the rancher who acted when it mattered most. The morning sun rose slowly over the wide, open plains, casting warm, golden light across Samuel Hayes' ranch. The night had been quiet, the herd secure, and the rustlers gone, leaving only the memory of the tension and bravery of the previous evening. Samuel stepped outside, stretching his stiff muscles and taking in the familiar sights of the land he loved. The barns, fences, and grazing cattle seemed almost peaceful now, yet he knew that the peace of the plains was fragile. Life on the frontier demanded constant vigilance, courage, and careful judgment, and Samuel had proven once again that experience and careful action could overcome even the most dangerous challenges. The stranger, still recovering from the events of the previous night, emerged from the barn, looking around with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "I still can't believe what happened yesterday," he said. "I thought we were doomed." "But you handled everything perfectly." Samuel smiled faintly, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Experience teaches you," he said simply, "but more importantly, you learn to trust yourself. Trust your instincts, trust your training, and never hesitate when the moment calls for action. That is the only way to survive out here." The man nodded slowly, taking in Samuel's words. He had learned more in one night than he had in years of struggling on his own. The encounter with the rustlers had been a harsh lesson, but it had also been an opportunity. He now understood the importance of preparation, courage, and decisive action. He looked at Samuel, who was adjusting his worn leather gloves, and realized the significance of the cryptic warning he had given the night before. "Don't take it off, just do it," the man repeated quietly. "I understand now." "It wasn't just about the gloves, was it?" Samuel shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. "No, it was about readiness, about acting when hesitation could cost everything. That's what those gloves represented. Preparation, focus, and courage in the moment that matters most." As the day began, Samuel and the stranger worked together to check the fences, the pens, and the pasture. The cattle grazed calmly, but Samuel knew that safety was not permanent. Life on the plains required constant attention and care. Every fence, every gate, every routine check was part of ensuring that the herd remained safe and that the ranch thrived. The stranger observed carefully, following Samuel's instructions, and slowly began to understand the rhythm of the land. Samuel explained how to anticipate problems, how to notice subtle signs of trouble, and how to respond calmly and decisively when challenges arose. By mid-morning, the stranger had gained confidence. He moved with purpose, helping Samuel repair a section of fence that had been damaged by wind. "I've never seen anyone work like this," he said. "It's not just skill, it's the way you think about everything." Samuel nodded. "The land teaches you lessons every day," he said. "You have to observe, anticipate, and act. And sometimes you have to act before you fully understand everything, trusting your instincts and experience." The events of the previous night continued to linger in Samuel's mind. He thought about the rustlers, the way they had underestimated him, and the lessons they had inadvertently taught the stranger. Courage and skill could overcome numbers and strength, but only when applied wisely. The plains were full of danger, but also full of opportunities to learn and grow. Every encounter, every challenge, was a chance to reinforce what one knew and to teach others the lessons of experience. By noon, the ranch was calm. Samuel led the stranger to a shaded area near the barn, where they could rest and discuss what had happened. The man sat on a wooden fence post, exhausted but eager to learn. "I never realized how much thought goes into everything here," he said. "I thought ranching was just hard work, but it's strategy, planning, and understanding everything around you." Samuel nodded, glad that the lesson had been understood. "It is," he said, "and more than that, it's about responsibility. You're not just responsible for yourself. You're responsible for the land, the animals, and sometimes for people who trust you. That responsibility shapes every decision you make." The stranger listened intently, absorbing every word. He began to understand why Samuel had succeeded where others might have failed. It wasn't just bravery or skill. It was awareness, experience, and the ability to act decisively in moments of uncertainty. The warning about the gloves, which had seemed so strange at first, now made complete sense. It was a metaphor, a reminder that preparation and courage were inseparable. It was a lesson that the stranger knew he would carry with him forever. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, Samuel led the stranger across the ranch, showing him the different pastures, the water sources, and the areas where predators or trouble might appear. He explained how to read the land, how to notice subtle changes, and how to respond calmly and effectively. The stranger asked questions eagerly, wanting to understand everything. Samuel answered patiently, sharing not just practical knowledge, but also the wisdom that came from years of living on the frontier. The day passed in a quiet rhythm. The cattle grazed, the wind blew gently across the plains, and the stranger grew more confident in his new understanding of ranch life. Samuel watched him closely, noting the careful way he handled the animals, the attention he paid to the land, and the respect he showed for the lessons he was being taught. The rancher felt a quiet pride. He had not only protected the herd, but had also passed on a piece of the wisdom that had kept him safe and successful all these years. As evening approached, Samuel and the stranger returned to the main barn. The herd was secure, the gates were checked, and the ranch was in order. Samuel paused for a moment, looking out across the plains as the sun set, casting long shadows and painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The events of the past day had been intense, but they had also been a reminder of why he loved this life. The land was demanding, the work was hard, but the rewards, knowledge, experience, and the satisfaction of protecting something valuable were greater than anything else. The stranger stood beside him, watching the sunset in silence. Finally, he spoke. "I won't forget today," he said. "You saved my herd, yes, but you also taught me something I'll carry for the rest of my life. I'll never forget the lesson of acting when it matters, even when you don't fully understand everything." Samuel nodded. "Good," he said. "That's all I hope for. Knowledge and courage are the true inheritance out here. Tools, equipment, and warnings, they're only helpful if you know how to act. That's the real lesson." The stranger looked thoughtful, realizing the depth of Samuel's words. The rancher had not just defended the herd. He had demonstrated the essence of life on the frontier: awareness, courage, preparation, and decisive action. The warning about the gloves had been strange at first, but it had become clear. It wasn't the gloves themselves that mattered, but the mindset they symbolized. Readiness, focus, and the willingness to act without hesitation could make the difference between success and failure. As night fell, Samuel and the stranger secured the ranch for the evening. The herd was calm, the gates were fastened, and the land seemed peaceful under the stars. Samuel took a moment to sit outside the barn, reflecting on the day's events. He felt satisfaction, not just for having protected the cattle, but for having passed on wisdom to someone who had needed it. The stranger had learned more in one day than many learned in a lifetime, and Samuel knew that the lesson would stay with him forever. Finally, Samuel stood and turned to the stranger. "Rest now," he said. "Tomorrow is another day and there will always be more to learn. But for today, we've done what needed to be done. Remember what you've seen. Remember what you've learned. And always act when the moment calls for it." The stranger nodded, gratitude shining in his eyes. "I will," he said. "I promise." Samuel watched him walk toward the barn, thinking about the future. The plains were wide, the challenges endless, and the life of a rancher was never easy. But he also knew that courage, wisdom, and decisive action could overcome almost anything. The story of the night's events would spread across the region, and those who heard it would remember not just the confrontation with the rustlers, but the lessons of preparation, courage, and the ability to act when hesitation could cost everything. As the stars shone brightly overhead and the wind whispered softly across the grass, Samuel Hayes felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had faced danger, protected the herd, taught a valuable lesson, and ensured that both the land and the people he cared for remained safe. The warning about the gloves, now fully understood, would remain a symbol of readiness and courage, a reminder that sometimes you must act even when you do not fully understand everything, trusting your experience and instincts to guide you. And so, under the quiet night sky of the Wild West, Samuel Hayes returned to his work, knowing that life would always present challenges, but that courage, preparation, and decisive action would always prevail. His story and the lessons he taught would continue to inspire others who faced danger and uncertainty, proving that even in the harshest conditions, those who act wisely and bravely can achieve success and leave a legacy of courage and wisdom.